Valérie Frison from the OECD Environment, Health and Safety Capacity Building team, and I'm very pleased to open today's discussion focused on industrial and consumer chemicals governance and how the IOMC Toolbox helps countries translate the Global Framework on Chemicals, or GFC, into national actions. Today's webinar will first provide an overview of the latest developments in the Industrial and Consumer Chemicals Management Scheme and explain how it supports implementation of the GFC target. Then we'll move to Canada's country experience of the legal and institutional framework presented by Magda Jagla and the National Chemicals Register presented by Michel Lorty, followed by a question and answer session at the end of the webinar and open discussion. If you have any questions during the presentations, please send them in the Q&A box and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. For my presentation, after some information on the Global Framework on Chemicals and the IOMC Toolbox, I will present the latest updates in the Industrial and Consumer Chemicals Management System, followed by a short demo. Then I will present how this management scheme contributes to the implementation of the GFC by linking its technical and functional elements to the targets and strategic objectives. And finally, I'll just mention the capacity building activities and share some useful links. As many of you know, the Global Framework on Chemicals, or GFC, was adopted in 2023 at the ICCM5. Its vision is simple but ambitious: a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste. It includes 5 strategic objectives and 28 measurable targets that aim to strengthen legal frameworks and enforcement, Objective A, knowledge and information, Objective B, issues of concern, Objective C, prevention and innovation, Objective D, and capacity building and partnerships, Objective E. This webinar series will show the IOMC Toolbox recent updates and how it helps countries make tangible progress under these objectives. Today, we will focus on the Industrial and Consumer Chemicals Management Scheme. The next webinar will be held on November 21st on the Pollutant Release and Transfer Registered. As previously with the SICAM, the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management, the IOMC Toolbox provides guidance that contributes to the implementation of the GFC strategic objectives. So the IOMC Toolbox is an internet-based e-learning platform that enables countries to identify the most relevant and efficient national chemicals management actions. It takes into account the resource available and guides the users towards cost-effective solutions adapted to the country. At each implementation step, the Toolbox presents the relevant IOMC resource, guidance documents, and training material that are all available online and free of charge. Recently, we have added some guidance that can help finding where the implementation of the GFC is linked to the IOMC Toolbox. We have added more information on links with the targets and also on the strategic objectives that are now filterable in the advanced search. And I will show you this in the demo later on. For the latest developments, we have in the Industrial and Consumer Chemicals Management Scheme recently added 2 new elements: the legal and institutional framework and the National Chemicals Register. We also added 2 new country case studies, one on Canada's chemical management plan, and another on Australia's industrial chemicals introduction scheme. We also added 2 new and more information pages, one mapping the IOMC Toolbox to the GFC targets, and one explaining the industrial and consumer chemical scheme contribution to the GFC. New tools will be added in the coming months, and a complete revision of this management scheme will be initiated next year. But I will now rapidly make a quick live demo of the IOMC Toolbox. So on the IOMC Toolbox homepage, on the top, you have a banner where you can directly go to the different management schemes, where you currently have a management scheme on best available techniques, chemical accident prevention, preparedness and response, classification and labeling system, the industrial one, the National Management Scheme for PRTRs, one for pesticides, Occupational Safety and Health Management Scheme, and one for public health. You also have news, help, and contact, and the IOMC is a link to the IOMC page, not the IOMC Toolbox, but the IOMC directly. Here at the top, you can directly make a search in the toolbox. You can select a management scheme here, and here search by keywords or by elements. For example, if you select a management scheme, you have a drop-down list of the elements, or you can just simply search for keywords. In the a little bit lower, you have all the list of the management schemes and a button to go to the navigation page that I will show you later on the industrial and consumer chemicals. Then we have also 5 toolkits that are linked to these topics that are separate from this page, and you have all the links here. And the list of events are also provided here in this calendar with some news, tutorials, and flyers. So now I will rapidly show you how you navigate in the management scheme, and also where are the latest news and updates in the industrial and consumer chemicals. Oh, this is the PRTR one, that's not the right. So for the management scheme, it always starts with some description information, and then you have more information pages that are listed here and that open in a different tab when you click on it. And this is where you have the more information page on mapping the whole toolbox to the GFC targets, and also a specific mapping for the industrial and consumer chemicals management, detailing for each element what targets are linked to it, and an explanation how it is linked. Then you have the list of elements, and for the industrial and consumer chemicals management scheme, you have key technical elements, key functional elements, then you have additional technical and additional functional elements. All of these elements are interesting for a cost-effective management scheme, but if you have a limited resource, you can start by the key ones, and then also by selecting the level of resource, it will here it will show you different ways of implementing the element according to how much resource you can put into this implementation. So this is where you can find the new legal and institutional framework by clicking here on the first key functional element. And then you have the whole list of implementation steps, and then the National Chemicals Register is here. So by selecting it, you will also find the whole list of implementation steps. And throughout the industrial and consumer chemicals management scheme, this is where you can find a list of tools and information. So for example, if I go back, sorry, it's a bit slow today. I think I clicked too many times. So if I go to the information data element, for example, in the list of tools, you have guidance documents from the IOMC organizations, and also you will find all the case studies from Canada and from Australia. So I will not now get back to my presentation. It's not working. There. So for the two recent elements that were added, we have the legal and institutional framework element that helps countries identify gaps and overlaps across their laws, clarify responsibilities among ministries, and ensure effective coordination. Most countries have multiple laws and regulations to govern the use, production, and disposal of chemicals. The governance of the sector is determined by the way countries organize themselves and legally, financially, and institutionally. A review of the existing legal and institutional frameworks for chemicals management can help identify gaps or duplication, ensure continuity, and enable an efficient use of resource. Legislation can generally be grouped into two main categories: statutes enacted by the national legislating body, which are the laws, and all the subordinated enactments, which are the regulations. Laws should ideally be kept as basic as possible to facilitate the approval by the national legislative bodies and leave flexibility in the implementation. And the regulations then give an operational effect to the law. They are better suited for defining technical details and requirements likely to be changed, as the law can be difficult to amend over time. The elements reflects the GFC emphasis on governance and likely directly contributes to the target A1, establishing legal frameworks, target A2, strengthening institutional capacity, targets E1 and E4, integrating chemicals management into national development, planning and financing, and target E2, ensuring multi-stakeholder coordination. Later in this webinar, Canada will share concrete lessons from their experience in this area. The second element is the establishment of a national chemicals register that is often regarded as a key element for sound management of chemicals, typically in the form of a database of substances. Manufacturers and importers such a register provides a regulatory authority with information on chemicals being used within its jurisdiction in order to support decision making to minimize their negative impact. So the type of information that is usually required is volumes placed on the market, intended use, and data on physical, chemical, and hazardous properties. This information will enable an identification and prioritization of chemicals for which risk management decisions should be taken. Also, this information will help then drafting national implementation plans required by international agreements such as the Stockholm Convention, and a register could also provide a basis for cost recovery systems. This element directly supports countries in implementing the GFC targets B1, B3, B5, and E6 by improving data availability, enhancing transparency and right to know, and strengthening coordination, monitoring, and evaluation of chemicals management systems. As I said earlier, also two country case studies were developed by the OECD Chemicals and Biotechnology Committee member countries to offer real-world example of technical and functional elements from existing national systems. These documents provide an overview of how key functional and technical elements are described in the IOMC Toolbox Industrial and Consumer Chemicals Management Scheme are applied in the context of the National Chemicals Program. To date, so we have Canada's and Australia's country experience, which have been published, and in the coming months we are hoping to have a few more country case studies. Next, I will briefly mention the contribution of this management scheme to the GFC objectives. By helping countries strengthen their legal and institutional frameworks, improve data generation and risk assessment capacities, and enhance compliance and enforcement systems, this management scheme contributes directly to achieving key GFC targets, including A1, A3, establishing legal frameworks, monitoring compliance, and ensuring access to poison centers. B1, B4, generating, sharing, and using data and information, building national inventories and registers, assessing and managing risks, and promoting public awareness. D2, D7, strengthening occupational and environmental protection through the application of the best practices and cleaner technologies. And E2, mainstreaming sound chemicals management across sectors, building partnerships and ensuring regular monitoring and evaluation. As I said during the demo, this scheme provides a step-by-step approach that is adaptable to the different resource level, where the country and the user can change the limited, medium, or high resource, and it will display different implementation options according to the resource available. And it encourages countries to use the IOMC Toolbox as a practical roadmap for turning global GFC commitments into national actions. Each element is linked to specific toolbox tools, guidance, examples that are developed by the IOMC, as well as country case studies, supporting countries in building integrated, transparent, and sustainable national programs for chemicals management. As I showed earlier, there are different groups of elements. I have listed them here, with each element listed the GFC target that is relevant. The Industrial and Consumer Chemicals Management Scheme collectively supports nearly all the GFC targets under strategic objectives A, B, D, and E. It provides a coherent and practical structure for countries to establish and strengthen their national chemicals management systems, from legislation to institutional capacity, to data generation, risk assessment, enforcement, and awareness. By combining technical and functional elements adaptable to different resource level, the scheme offers one of the most comprehensive mechanisms for translating the GFC global commitments into operational national actions. Very, very rapidly, I will now share our capacity building activities. We do promotion and also training on the IMC Toolbox on other topics in cooperation with the other IOMC organizations. We also develop tailored capacity building events such as national and regional workshops on chemicals policies, pesticide, industrial chemicals, risk management, health aspects. And we also organize webinars on management systems, technical topics, flagship tools, and topics and toolkits. If you wish to request for a webinar or workshop, please don't hesitate to send me a message. And if it's not directly related to OECD work, in any case, I will share your request with the IOMC partner organizations, FAO, UNITAR, WHO, ILO, UNEP, I don't know who I forgot. And we organize the capacity building all together. So please don't hesitate. Our next webinar, the second webinar of this series, is also a side event to the fifth session of the meeting of the parties to the protocol on pollutant release and transfer registers in Geneva on 21st of November. And we will present a completely revised PRTR management scheme, flagship guidance documents, country experience, and also how the PRTR management scheme contributes to the GFC. So if you're interested, please go to the events webpage and click on the link to register. And also, here are some links and publication links to the IMC Toolbox, of course, to the capacity building page of the OECD work on chemical safety, the GFC page, publication search page, and the link to this event's webpage, where we will upload all the presentations and the video recording. So if you wish to share it or view it again, the information will be there. When it will be made available, we will send you all an email. And here are some OECD publications that might be of interest too. So thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Magda Jagla.
Hello, everybody. Let me just share my screen. So I'll just set up here quickly. Here we are. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. All right, thank you for joining this webinar. It is my pleasure to be here. My name is Magdalena Jagla. I'm a manager at Environment and Climate Change Canada, Science and Technology branch in the Substance Prioritization, Assessment and Coordination Division. So in this presentation, I will be giving an overview of how key functional and technical elements described in the IOMC Toolbox for decision-making chemicals management are applied in the context of Canada's Chemicals Management Plan to identify, assess, and if needed, manage industrial chemicals. So just to start my presentation, back in 2021, the OECD Chemicals and Biotechnology Committee endorsed a proposal to enhance the utility of the IOMC Toolbox by adding country case studies to this scheme and using Canada's Chemicals Management Plan as a pilot. The Chemicals Management Plan, or CMP, is Government of Canada program aimed at reducing the risks posed by new and existing substances to humans and the environment. And the IOMC Toolbox case study report, now publicly available, focuses on functional and technical elements described in the IOMC Industrial Chemicals Management Scheme. So some of these elements are captured on this slide here, and will be the focus of my presentation today. The case study maps out the elements of the IOMC Industrial Chemicals Scheme versus Canada's Chemicals Management Plan program area. So today I will be discussing the legislative and institutional framework element of the toolbox and how it compares to CMP. This includes our legislative framework, the evolution of our chemicals management program, and how we conduct our risk assessment and risk management and other activities relevant to the chemicals management cycle. And my colleague Michel Lortie, who is here, will be speaking to other elements of the toolbox, including the National Industrial Chemicals Register element in his following presentation. So starting with some background on the legislative and institutional framework in Canada, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, also known by its acronym as CEPA, is Canada's main federal legislation aimed at preventing pollution and protecting the environment and human health. The other federal acts that also have environmental protection components to them that are used in Canadian legislation are, for example, the Feeds Act, Fertilizer Act, Pest Control Products Act, and Food and Drugs Act. But CEPA is what we consider the catch-all legislation for regulating all other types of substances that are not captured by other acts. So, for example, industrial chemicals are regulated under CEPA. CEPA provides the legislative authority for assessment and management of both new substances, so those ones before they enter Canadian market, as well as existing substances that are already in commerce in Canada. And as mentioned, the CMP is a Government of Canada program aimed at reducing the risks posed by new and existing substances to humans and the environment. And it is two federal departments, Environment and Climate Change Canada and Health Canada, that jointly administer the CMP. So just a little bit more on CEPA. The Act enables the management of various types of pollution risks beyond just chemicals. It also sets out requirements for managing transboundary movement of hazardous waste, animate products of biotechnology, environmental emergencies, vehicle and engine emissions, nutrients, disposal at sea, just as some examples. So it covers a diversity of activities that can affect human health and the environment. So next, I will be discussing the evolution of Canada's Chemicals Management Plan, and this slide shows an overall timeline and certain key milestones for chemicals management activities in Canada. So starting just at the bottom, when CEPA was created in 1988, the government brought together environmental provisions of several other statutes administered by Environment Canada. Those provisions included those dealing with toxic substances, nutrients, ocean dumping, environmental research guidelines and codes of practice, as well as agreements with provinces and territories. And now moving up a few years to 1991, the Canadian Domestic Substances List, or the DSL, was published. My colleague Michel will be going into further detail about the DSL and how it relates to the National Industrial Chemicals Register element of the toolbox. But I will just mention that At the time of the publication, the DSL included approximately 23,000 substances deemed to have been in the Canadian commerce between January 1984 and December 1986. A few years later, in 1994, the new substances notification regulations for chemicals and polymers were established to screen all new substances for potential risks to human health and environment before allowing their introduction into a Canadian market. And these were followed by parallel new substances notification regulations for organisms. However, thousands of existing substances were already in the market before that time, many which had not been examined for their potential to pose a risk to environment or human health. So, as a result, the second aim of the DSL is also to provide a basis for the government of Canada to distinguish between existing and new substances for regulatory purpose. And in general, any substance not on the DSL is considered a new substance and has to be notified under the new substances notification regulations to be marketed in Canada. So at first, all environmental assessments and human health assessments were completed under the Priority Substances Assessment Program. And so the first Priority Substances List, or PSL1, was established in 1981 and included 44 substances or groups of substances. So some examples are provided in the top left pop-up window for this first list. In some cases, there were substances for which a regulatory conclusion could not be reached at the time, and a follow-up to the original assessment report has been undertaken following a review of new information. And then a few years later, in 1995, risk assessments for additional substances were identified as priorities for assessment based on recommendations from multi-stakeholder expert advisory panels. They were subsequently added to the second priority substances list, or PSL2, under the authorities of SIPA 1988. And the bottom right window includes examples of the second list of priorities. So overall, the PSL assessments were very significant, addressing priority chemicals, and still today remain relevant and important. Moving along, SIPA was reformed in 1999 and provided the government of Canada with new prescriptive measures on how to address existing chemicals, including measures for prioritization of chemicals on the domestic substances list. So SIPA 1999 established that within 7 years, the 23,000 chemicals on the DSL would be prioritized through the process called categorization. Using information from Canadian industry, academic research, and other countries, the Government of Canada scientists work with partners in applying a set of rigorous tools to the large list of chemicals, the 23,000 chemicals on the DSL. And these chemicals were categorized to identify those that were inherently toxic to humans or to the environment, and those that were persistent, that would take a very long time to break down in the environment, and or bioaccumulative, collect in living organisms or end up in the food chains. And also from human health perspective, substances to which people might have the greatest potential for exposure. The categorization process was completed in 2006 and resulted in identification of approximately 4,300 priority substances for assessment under SIPA. And then this led to the launch of the Chemicals Management Plan in 2006. And the plan is delivered jointly by Environment and Climate Change Canada and Health Canada and covers chemicals, polymers, and animate products of biotechnology, so collectively called substances. So about CMP. So the CMP had a goal of addressing those 4,300 priorities in 3 phases, which we refer to as CMP1, CMP2, and CMP3. Also important to note that at a point during the second phase of CMP, a priority approach called Identification of Risk Assessment Priorities, or IRAP, was launched. It was determined at the time that a more comprehensive approach that expanded on categorization was needed for prioritizing, recognizing the cyclical nature of priority setting. And I will return to prioritization and IRAP later in my presentation. So phase one of CMP took place between approximately 2006 and 2011 and assessed about 1,100 substances. Some examples of substances assessed are presented in the top left window. And I know that as program developed, it also required more resources. So to illustrate this, if you look at the bottom right-hand hand corner of this slide, it represents, the little figures represent the number of full-time employees employed by the program. So each bottom figure showing here represents about 20 full-time employees, and this will gradually increase to meet the growing program demands. Phase two of CMP took place between approximately 2011 to 2016 and assessed approximately just over 1,600 substances. And example of substances are included in the top left window. But I will note that starting in CMP2, we have begun considering groupings and classes of chemicals as opposed to single substances, and also employ the use of rapid screening to stream the assessment approaches for low-risk chemicals. And so let's look again at the bottom right figure reflecting the evolution and growing complexity of the program. The amount of full-time employees more than doubled, increasing now to approximately 400 staff. And phase three of CMP, commencing in around 2016, addressed over 1,500 substances. And during the third phase, the program maintained a staffing level of over 400 full-time employees, and this staffing level is consistent today. We have scientific regulators from a variety of backgrounds and disciplines, including chemists, toxicologists, biologists, environmentalists, health scientists, engineers. We're increasingly looking to computational scientists. And we also have support from economists, data managers, and legal services, just to name some of the areas of expertise. In 2021, the government of Canada renewed its commitment to the CMP. And in 2023, amendments to CEPA modernized many of its provisions with respect to chemicals management. So Bill S5, also known as the Strengthening Environmental Protection for a Healthier Canada Act, represented the first set of comprehensive amendments to CEPA 1999, since it was first enacted over 20 years ago. The amended CEPA involves various important elements that strengthen environmental protection and chemicals management. It sets new requirements that the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Health must deliver. That the Minister of the Environment and the Minister of Health must develop a new plan of priorities. The plan includes priorities to inform for information gathering, research and monitoring, risk assessment, risk management, and risk communications. And this new requirement replaces the completed DSL categorization exercise. And so on the plan of priorities published in 2025, there are about 30 entries for substances or groups of substances encompassing approximately 500 individual substances, with some examples noted in the top left window. And you will see here some substances of emerging concern, like quaternary ammonium compounds, certain organic flame retardants, 6-PPD and 6-PPD quinone, to just name a few examples. This plan of priorities must be reviewed at least every 8 years, though it may be updated more frequently. And there must also be annual reporting on progress made in assessing the substances that are specified on the plan of priorities. So in summary here, over the past nearly 4 decades, the Canadian Chemical Management Program has greatly evolved, building on the approaches introduced earlier during their PSL days, becoming increasingly more complex, evolving alongside the new scientific findings and the domestic and international regulatory contexts. So next, I'd like to talk about the chemicals management cycle. And this figure illustrates the chemicals management cycle and its components and core functions. These elements are cyclical and are also interconnected. So at the center, engagement with a variety of stakeholders, indigenous rights holders and partners, and outreach to the public are fundamental to delivering the core functions of the CMP. The central component relates to the other 6 interconnected components that make up chemicals management cycle in Canada. It is fundamental to transparency for decision-making, building and maintaining trust, and ensuring good communication, all of those things. So let's now move to the top of this figure. Research and monitoring, as well as other forms of information gathering, are a key component for helping to inform scientific and regulatory decision-making. Those activities feed into risk assessment to assess priority chemicals currently in commerce, as well as new substances entering the Canadian market. When assessments identify a substance as toxic under CEPA, risk management is under risks. Compliance promotion is another important component for raising awareness and helping the regulated communities understand their obligations to comply with the law and its regulations, and encourage their voluntary compliance with risk management measures. And at Environment and Climate Change Canada, we also have enforcement officers who can take actions to bring regulated parties back into compliance when needed. And last but not least, performance measurement, evaluation, and reporting is an important component to evaluate the effectiveness of risk management actions and determine whether objectives are being met. And so information gathering, research monitoring can also help with, and is used as a tool to inform performance measurement. Okay, so on this slide, I'll talk about prioritization. And so building on the 2006 categorization exercise and consider new information to identify substances that may have the potential to cause harm to the environment or human health, as well as recognizing that prioritization is cyclical in nature. In 2014, the Identification of Risk Assessment Priorities, or IRAP approach, was established. The approach entails a systematic collection, consolidation, and analysis of information to determine appropriate action. There are 3 steps involved in the IRAP process, and they're presented here in the figure on the right-hand side of the slide from top to bottom. So acquisition is the step 1, acquisition of information relevant to the potential health and ecological risks of substances. And it is done via consideration of emerging science and monitoring, internal program nominations or external nominations. Second step is evaluation of information available for each substance and identification of appropriate next steps. And third step is action, which is the recommended outcome. The acquisition of new information, or step 1, occurs on an ongoing basis, while the other 2 steps are generally performed at regular intervals. Also, with the new public request to assess mechanism, there is now a greater flexibility under the CMP to determine substances or classes of substances prioritized for assessment. So under the amendments to CEPA set out under Bill S5, Any person may request that the minister assess a substance, and we have already received a couple of requests for assessments from this route. In addition, Environment and Climate Change Canada and Health Canada have developed science approaches to help refine prioritization results, and these can feed into the second evaluation step of IRAP. So Environment and Climate Change Canada developed the Ecological Risk Classification of Organic Substances, or ERC, version 1, helped to reprioritize just over 600 organic chemicals in the third phase of chemicals management plan. And since then, this first version was updated to version 2, which is now used to help prioritize substances for assessment. Both of these approaches, so version 1 and 2, are weight of evidence and risk-based. They also follow the principles of OECD integrated approaches for testing and assessment, or IATA, and have consequently been published as OECD IATA case studies in 2018 and just recently for version 2 in September 2025. For inorganic substances, an ERC approach was developed in 2018 to further prioritize and classify approximately 80 inorganic substances with low level of ecological concern and to help streamline assessment process. And then similarly, Health Canada developed a parallel approach called the Health Canada Automated Workflow for Prioritization, or HOPPER. And both HOPPER and ERC version 1, version 2, and ERC-E for inorganics have all been published as science approach documents and are available on the Government of Canada website. A little bit on risk assessment. So in the Canadian context, scientific evaluations of substances are referred to as risk assessment or screening assessments. They are conducted as a single activity under the CMP, encompassing all three technical elements described in the IOMC Toolbox, so hazard assessment, exposure assessment, and risk characterization. And as previously mentioned, the regulatory oversight includes both existing and new substances. And under CEPA, Environment and Climate Change Canada and Health Canada jointly assess these types of substances to determine if they present or may present a risk to the environment or human health. And because CEPA is risk-based, assessment conclusions are based on scientific evaluation of risk. So what this means is that we consider both the hazardous properties and the nature and extent of exposure to people in Canada and environment. Risk assessments are fit for purpose. They might address a single or numerous substances as a class and follow an approach that is most appropriate for the substances. It is important to note that we evaluate the studies for quality and relevance to be accepted as a line of evidence. All of this is to reduce uncertainty as much as possible and look at the available data set holistically. The regulatory process under CEPA is also heavy on consultation with stakeholders and subject matter experts, and this can include expert peer reviews to ensure scientific soundness and quality of the risk assessment, and then lots of stakeholder engagement with existing fora or on an ad hoc basis and communications such as we're doing now. In risk assessment, we apply a weight of evidence approach as well as the precautionary principle. This diagram illustrates the weight of evidence approach taken when looking at lines of evidence, the associated uncertainties, and need for precaution, all of which feed into the overall decision making within an assessment. Uncertainty in risk assessment is something that we identify in a very transparent way and address it if possible, since the level of uncertainty speaks to the confidence we have with the assessment outcomes. Some examples are listed here. For example, the quality and amount of relevant data, identification of any significant data gaps that may be filled with approaches such as modeling or read across, We explain assumptions, and finally, we specify whether uncertainties can result in over or underestimation of risk. The outcome of the assessment is both a regulatory conclusion on toxicity under SEPA and helps to inform the minister's decision on actions, if any are needed, that can be taken to manage risk. And finally, we consider international actions. So for information from international assessments and decisions, for example, those under REACH or the US EPA, Australia, if available, decisions are considered as part of the weight of evidence. However, there may be differences in conclusions guided by regulatory differences. For example, SEPA is risk-based. Exposure levels in Canada may be different than other jurisdictions. Regulatory context can be different, as well as the use of different approaches. So all of this is evaluated and carefully considered. As the draft risk management, okay. Risk management with focus on existing substances. So the proposed risk management actions involve the development of risk management instruments to prevent or manage risks. These instruments could be used to restrict how a chemical substance can be used, how it is made, and the amount of concentration that can be released into the environment. The chemicals management plan develops risk management instruments by considering a number of factors and guiding principles that are noted here on this slide. Once the program has taken key factors into consideration, instrument choice generally falls into 4 categories that appear listed on this slide. These include a suite of risk management instruments available under SEPA or other federal statutes. A variety of voluntary and mandatory instruments are used to manage risks posed by chemical substances. This range of options allows risk managers to use flexible, adaptable, and phased approaches when dealing with harmful chemical substances in an integrated global market. Some examples of risk management instruments are regulations, pollution prevention planning notices, release guidelines or codes of practice, environmental performance agreements. And additional risk management instruments can include provisions that require any major changes in the way a substance is used to be reported so that the government can decide whether to control the new uses. And this is referred to as significant new activity. And then for new substances, ministerial conditions for new substances can be applied that restrict the manner or limit the manner in which new substance may be imported or manufactured in Canada. And finally, on engagement and collaboration on the international stage, Canada is active across various initiatives internationally to complement domestic efforts. This includes formal and informal mechanisms for bilateral cooperation with partners. Multilaterally, this includes membership in environmental conventions and international organizations and agreements. Canada is an active participant within the OECD Chemicals Program, where it collaborates with other countries on technical and policy issues related to chemicals management. Canada actively engages with UNEP in many areas, including plastics, biodiversity, chemicals, climate change, and air pollution. We have also contributed to the multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder efforts of SACEM and the Global Framework on Chemicals to support advancement of sound management of chemicals. And Canada assists WHO in developing guidance and tools to assess, prioritize, manage, and mitigate health effects associated with environmental risk factors, including hazardous chemicals, air pollution, water quality, and climate change. Canada also actively contributes to shaping and implementing several multilateral environmental agreements, which are listed on this slide. So a number of conventions, importantly, Stockholm Convention, Basel, Rotterdam, Minamata Convention, as well as the Montreal Protocol. So the international engagement and collaborations enable Canada to strengthen protections domestically while also advancing the sound management of chemicals and waste around the world. And lastly, on the next two slides, I have summarized some links that offer more information on the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So the first is a link to the legislation itself. The second is a plain language summary of the amendments that were made in June 2023 as a result of Bill S5. And the third link goes to a webpage that provides information on opportunities for providing input to implementation plans and links to documents undergoing public consultations. And here are some additional links specific to the chemicals management plan, including one to the main page about the CMP, a table that lists the status of all substances prioritized under the CMP, and a webpage with latest news on the CMP. And finally, a link where you can subscribe to receive emails and updates on chemicals assessment and management actions for CMP. So with this, thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the Q&A session at the end. And I will now stop sharing my presentation and pass the floor to my colleague, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Magda. Let's see here if I can get the screen to share. All right. So I'll be speaking to the National Industrial Chemicals Registers component of the IOMC Toolbox. So this additional functional element that is key in the toolbox. And specifically, as Magda pointed out, the industrial chemical lists in Canada is called the Domestic Substance List. And it's our National Industrial Chemical Register, and it's the example that I'll be talking about today for the purpose of Canada's example in the IOMC Toolbox. I'll speak a little bit about the history of the Domestic Substance List. I'll talk about the aim of the DSL. I'll provide some information on this list. Talk a little bit about the mechanics, so reporting and maintenance of the domestic substance list. And then finally, I'll speak to the access to the data that is found on this list. So the domestic substance list, as discussed previously, is a sort of a foundational piece. That's an extension, if you will, of our legislation, CEPA. And it's maintained under CEPA. It's a post-market register of substances that are in commerce in Canada. It's also, as Magda pointed out, it's the basis to determining whether a substance is new to Canada or whether it's existing. The DSL originally was around 23,000 chemicals, but is now up to 28,865 chemicals, polymers, and living organisms. And so these, as of today, are considered substances that are existing in Canada. And again, some information here just to point out the differences between how existing substances and new substances are handled, if you will, under our legislation under CEPA. So existing substances, as mentioned before, were either in commerce in Canada between January 1st, 1984 to December 31st, 1986, or they were assessed under Canada's New Substance Program. And they are no longer subject or not subject to the new substance regulations. Whereas substances that are not on this list are considered new, and they're subject to regulations for new substances. So manufacturers and importers for chemicals and polymers of quantities that are prescribed, so above a certain threshold, must be notified to the government, to Environment Canada and Health Canada. In the case of organisms, there are no trigger or thresholds. Those just have to be manufactured or imported into Canada to be subject to those regulations. In terms of history, and Magda provided a very nice overall history of our program in Canada, but more specifically to the history of the domestic substance list. In the late 80s, the Government of Canada invited manufacturers and importers to nominate substances in commerce in quantities that exceeded 100 kilogram per calendar year. And that information was collected between January 1984 and December 1986. The information gathered included the use, included also the sites of manufacture, as well as quantities that were in commerce at the time. And all complete nominations were used to create the DSL. Developing the DSL required considerable resources, so we won't sugarcoat it. This required a lot of effort on the part of the government to develop the policies and also the draft preliminary lists, consult with the interested parties, and then ultimately publish this list in the Canada Gazette. The original DSL was released in 1991. Following consultation and amendments, it was later repealed and replaced with an updated list. The amended list, published in 1994, included approximately 23,000 substances. Now, the aim of the domestic substance list, the primary aim of the domestic substance list is to provide the Government of Canada with some information on the substances and the quantities that were in commerce in Canada's jurisdiction between 84 and 86. And the second aim of the DSL was to provide a basis to distinguish what is existing and what is new for the purpose of assessments. And again, this ties into, or is an extension, if you will, of the legislation of CEPA. So substances that are not on the DSL must be notified and assessed prior to their manufacture or import into Canada. And the information requirements are set in the regulations. There are two sets of regulations, one for organisms and one for chemicals and polymers. Now, obviously, the DSL, since 84, 86, or since its first publication in 91, has been regularly amended to add substances that have entered the commerce following assessment under the New Substances Program. Now, information that is found on the domestic substance list. So the DSL is divided into 8 parts, and this is to distinguish between substance type. It's also to distinguish substances that have public identity versus confidential. And then it is also to some of the parts actually pertain to additional notification requirement that apply under CEPA. The DSL also includes substance identifiers. So for the purpose of the Canadian DSL or the domestic substance list, chemical abstract services registration numbers are used, so commonly referred to as CAS-RN. You can also find substances identified with confidential accession numbers and mask names. In the case of organisms, you will find the specific living organism name. This can also be present with the American type culture collection number. And you also will find biochemicals, which in the case of enzymes can be identified with enzyme commission numbers. In addition to these identifiers, you will also find flags that indicate the regulatory status of substances or specific scenarios around the addition of these substances to the DSL. So for example, the N flag will appear next to substances that were not originally listed on the DSL during the nomination period, but these are substances that would have come in through the New Substance Program and following the regulations and a complete assessment. There's also specific notification requirements flags. So for example, the S flag, which stands for significant new activity provisions, in our legislation, which can apply to certain substances. And so that means that if you're engaging in a new activity, for example, you may be required to notify the government with information prior to conducting that new activity. Now, a little bit about the mechanics of the inventory. On average, the DSL is amended about 12 times per year, and this is to add. This is mostly to add substances that have undergone assessments under the new substance program. You'll also find instances where information is updated, and then also instances where the information on substances can be corrected. The Minister of Environment and Climate Change must also add substances to the DSL 120 days after a substance meets the listing criteria. So the listing criteria, for example, include the submission of all regulatory information that was needed under the new substance notification regulations. The assessment must be completed, so the assessment period is over. The substance is not subject to ministerial conditions, which are restrictions that are put in place when risks are identified. And the substance has to have been manufactured or imported into Canada. So when all those listing criteria are met, these substances are then bundled, if you will, and about 12 times a year, the minister will approve the addition of substances to the DSL. Now, just a little bit of information on the recent amendments to our legislation in 2023. Some powers were added for the minister to be able to remove substances from the DSL. So, for example, the minister may remove a substance if it's not being manufactured in Canada, imported in Canada, it's not in Canadian commerce, or used for commercial manufacturing purposes in Canada. So this provision did not exist before. So if you were added to the DSL, you basically were allowed to remain there, even if you were no longer in commerce. Now, sort of getting towards the end here of the talk on the inventory, just an important concept here is that obviously for these registers to be effective, they have to be accessible, and the information on them has to be accessible. Obviously, the legislation, regulations, instruments, notices, all of these are published officially in the Canada Gazette. So that's basically where the authorities lie. However, to help with compliance, because there's a lot of information that's captured and a lot of individual publications that would have to be compiled for the information to be easily accessible, we have a tool that's called the Substance Search, which is an online tool where people can look up substance names, some of the key identifiers we talked about, so the CAS-RN, for example. And in there, you can find various legislative or regulatory information relating to these substances. Another really important key element, if you will, of this important functional module of the framework is that transparency and accountability must be part of the guiding principles, and they are in our legislation in Canada. And as such, the Minister of the Environment, in fact, has the authority to disclose confidential names after a period of time. So in this case, 10 years. So names that were added to the inventory that were masked can be unmasked following the publication of a notice of intent to do so. So as a result of, and these are the result of recent changes in 2023 to our legislation, the Government of Canada, Environment and Health were conducting a review of substances listed confidentially on the DSL since 2013 or earlier to implement this authority. So we're currently going through our inventory to see what substances could be unmasked. So finally, just to provide everyone with some easy links to the information that was presented in this presentation and in the previous presentation that my colleague Magda presented. Here are a couple of links. So one to the domestic substance list, the substance search tool, Canada's new substance program, more information on the significant new activity provisions of SEPA, so the S flag that I was mentioning earlier, our legislation, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, as well as the Canada Gazette, where all the official publications can be found. So with that, I'll stop here and welcome questions from our participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel and Magda, and thank you all for attending.